In the theater of modern leadership, a paradox unfolds. What is often heralded as guidance and strength is in truth a veiled form of domination. Carl Jung's insights into the human psyche reveal that the archetype of the true leader is not one who imposes will upon others, but one who has achieved individuation, a harmonious integration of the conscious and unconscious, the masculine and feminine within. Yet, contemporary leadership frequently neglects this balance, favoring control over connection. Jung observed that when leaders are disconnected from their inner selves, they project their unacknowledged shadows onto those they lead, mistaking authority for authenticity. This projection manifests as a leadership style that prioritizes hierarchy and obedience, suppressing the very qualities intuition, empathy, collaboration that are essential for genuine growth and transformation. Such an approach not only stifles the potential of individuals, but also perpetuates a cycle of fear and dependency. True leadership, as Jung might argue, requires a descent into the depths of one's own psyche, confronting and embracing the shadow and emerging with a renewed sense of self that is both whole and humble. It is through this inner journey that a leader becomes capable of fostering environments where others can also embark on their paths of individuation. In doing so, leadership transforms from an act of domination to one of empowerment, from a display of control to a dance of mutual growth. Therefore, the call to modern leaders is clear: to shift from a paradigm of power over others to one of presence with others. To lead not from the ego's desire to dominate, but from the soul's yearning to connect. In embracing this path, leadership becomes not a role to perform, but a state of being, to embody a beacon guiding others not through force, but through the light of self-awareness and authenticity. You call it leadership, but does she feel safe beneath your voice? Or silenced by it? Does she feel uplifted by your direction? Or compressed by the weight of your certainty? Because there's a violence more insidious than physical force. It is the quiet domination of presence disguised as purpose. The kind that wraps itself in responsibility while never pausing to ask, whose truth am I leading from? You say you're leading, but have you listened? Not just to her words, but to her withdrawal, to her pause before speaking, to the way her fire dims just slightly. Each time your certainty fills the room like smoke, there is a line, subtle, sacred, between holding space and taking space, between guiding and gripping, between influence and intrusion. And if you have not walked the labyrinth of your own ego, if you have not sat in the furnace of your own shadow, then your leadership is not leadership. It is fear wearing the robes of righteousness. Carl Jung warned us, the privilege is to become who you truly are. But how can you lead anyone if you have not yet found yourself? How can you offer vision if you are still haunted by the need to be obeyed? True leadership is not a script. It's not a position. It's not a crown earned by accolades or status. It is a frequency, a resonance of someone who has gone to war with his own illusions and emerged with nothing left to prove. You call it leadership, but until your presence liberates, instead of confines, you are still leading from the wound, not the soul. And the wound, when left unseen, becomes the architect of control. It whispers to you, if you don't direct her, she will drift. If you don't decide, she will destroy. If you don't dominate, you will disappear. That's not leadership. That's ego in panic. That's the inner child posing as the patriarch. That's fear dressed in the armor of masculinity, calling itself protector, but hiding the truth. It does not trust the feminine. And if you do not trust her, If you do not trust her chaos, her wisdom, her intuition, her way of knowing, then what you call leadership is nothing more than colonialism of the soul. You do not lead a woman. You lead yourself in her presence. You lead your nervous system to remain calm when she is fire. You lead your voice to soften when she tests the edge of your conviction. You lead your attention back to her when your mind wants to escape into logic, power, and plans. And when she sees you do that again and again, without fanfare, without needing to be thanked or followed, she begins to trust something deeper than direction. She trusts your devotion, not to her as an idea, not to the role of protector or guide, but to truth, to reality, to the wild, sacred unfolding of life in its rawest form. And she begins to relax, not into your control, but into your clarity. She doesn't want your dominance. She wants your discipline, the kind that says, I have mastered myself enough to not need to master you. And that is where true leadership begins. Not when you bend her to your frame, but when your frame is strong enough to hold her freedom. Not when she conforms to your vision, but when she flourishes within it. Not when you dictate her path, but when you walk beside her as she finds her own. Because the strongest leader is the one who no longer needs to lead. He simply is, fully, firmly, silently rooted in something deeper than hierarchy or control, rooted in presence. And presence is not passive. It is the fiercest form of love, the most courageous form of strength. Presence says, you are free to disagree. You are free to feel. You are free to outgrow me. And I will not use my power to keep you small. She calls it domination, because she's felt what domination feels like. The sharpness of it, the tightening, the way it turns rooms into courts and conversations into verdicts. But when you become present, when you become here, without the impulse to correct or contain, something radical happens. She no longer resists. She relaxes. Not because you took charge, but because you stopped gripping. That's the paradox. The less you need to lead her, the more she'll follow you. Not out of obedience, but out of resonance, because resonance is the language of the soul. And when your leadership resonates with her essence, not her ego, when your presence vibrates on the frequency of her truth, not her fear, she doesn't follow because she should. She follows because she feels. She feels safer in your presence than she does in her walls. She feels more seen in your silence than in the words of 1,000 false lovers. She feels more powerful in your gaze than she does in any room she ever tried to dominate. Because you didn't lead her into submission. You led her into remembrance. You reminded her what it means to trust again, to soften, to let go of the armor she wore, to survive a world of men who confused control with care. You reminded her that true masculinity doesn't suppress the feminine. It shelters it, not like a prison, like a grove, a wild forest where she can dance, weep, scream, and bloom without ever asking, am I too much? Because you became the man who could hold all of her, not with dominance, with devotion. And that is where everything changes. That is where leadership ends and legacy begins. A legacy not built on obedience, but on awakening. Not on systems, but on souls. Not on fear, but on freedom. And that freedom, it begins with you, leading not from the top, but from the truth. And the truth is this: you were never called to lead from power. You were called to lead from presence, from the quiet knowing that says, I am enough, even when I am not obeyed, even when I am not agreed with, even when I am not followed. Because your leadership is no longer a performance. It is a practice, a presence, a pulse. And in that pulse, she feels the safety she has searched for her entire life. Not safety from harm, but safety to expand, to unfold, to erupt in her fullness without fear of being punished for the brilliance of her being. You don't demand her submission. You earn her surrender, not through dominance, but through depth, not by silencing her voice, but by listening so deeply, she hears her own soul in your stillness. And when she hears that, when your presence becomes a mirror, not a muzzle, she rises. She rises in love, not in fear. She rises in her body, not out of it. She rises into a life not built for compliance, but for co-creation. Because when you lead from presence, you don't lead from above. You lead from within. And in that sacred inner stillness, she meets the version of you were always becoming, the one who no longer needs to control her because he has finally claimed himself. And when a man truly claims himself, not with bravado, not with volume, but with the sacred calm of someone who has walked through the fire and chosen truth over triumph, his leadership becomes a sanctuary, a place not to dominate, but to dwell, not to command, but to connect, not to conquer, but to co-create. He no longer fears her power. He honors it because he has made peace with his own. He no longer shrinks her radiance to feel taller. He reflects it because his light is no longer conditional. That kind of man, he doesn't need to be followed. He needs only to be. And in his being, he offers the world something rare. A leader who listens, a protector who never possesses. A presence that needs no title because it transforms without a word. She doesn't resist him. She respects him. Not because he demanded it, but because he embodied it. She doesn't fear being lost in him. She finds herself with him because he doesn't confuse direction with domination. He knows the greatest leaders are not those who take her hand, but those who hold space for her to find her own. And in that shared sovereignty, there is no power struggle. There is only power shared, power seen, power rooted in presence so profound that domination is no longer even a question. It dissolves. And all that remains is truth and trust. And two people finally free to lead themselves and each other into something holy. Because what is more holy than two beings who do not need to control, to correct, to conform, but who simply choose to witness each other fully? Where she no longer has to perform softness to be safe, and you no longer have to perform strength to be worthy, where leadership is not a posture of superiority, but a practice of self-mastery, where love is not leveraged to gain loyalty, but given freely as a natural extension of two liberated souls walking side by side. That is the new masculine, not louder, but deeper, not harsher, but wiser, not suppressing, but supporting the rise of everything the world once taught him to fear. And she doesn't want a throne beneath you. She wants a place beside you, where her voice is not filtered through your comfort, but celebrated in its rawness, where her heart is not bent to match your logic, but held in the mystery of its own intelligence. That is the revolution of relationship. That is the new paradigm of leadership, not from the mind alone, but from the soul, awake, aware, and unwavering. So no, she doesn't want to be led by force, by fear, by formula. She wants to be met by a man who leads himself so honestly, so humbly, that his very presence becomes the path back to herself. And that is a love that does not fade. That is a legacy that outlives empires, because it was never built on control, but on consciousness. And consciousness is the one thing that cannot be faked. It cannot be performed. It cannot be memorized. It must be lived. In the way your eyes stay open when it's hard. In the way your breath slows instead of rushing to defend. In the way you choose to feel before you fix. To understand before you instruct. To hold before you handle. That is the language of the awakened man. Not the man who leads with ultimatums, but with unwavering awareness. Not the man who claims her heart with pressure, but with presence so rooted, she forgets the world ever taught her to run. And that man, he doesn't need applause. He doesn't need validation, because he knows his leadership is not for show. It's for service to something bigger than himself, to something truer than his opinions, to the divine dance of masculine and feminine, not at war, but in rhythm. And that rhythm, it doesn't crush, it carries, it uplifts, it liberates. That's the kind of leadership the world is starving for. Not leadership that speaks over, but leadership that listens under, that listens to the tone beneath her tone, the silence between her words, the wisdom in her wildness, because you who have walked this path, you know now, if your leadership demands her obedience, it is not love. If your presence dims her light, it is not strength. If your guidance cages her wings, it is not leadership. It is only fear masked in masculine form. But you chose another way. You chose consciousness over control. And because of that, she rises. And when she rises, not in rebellion, not in resistance, but in reverence, you begin to understand the depth of what you've done. You didn't just lead her, you freed her from the quiet oppression of being shaped, freed her from the performance of being palatable, freed her from the echo of men who mistook love for possession. And in doing so, you freed yourself from the false weight of needing to know everything, from the exhausting performance of invincibility, from the illusion that leadership requires control instead of courage. The courage to meet the feminine in her fullness, not just her grace, but her chaos. The courage to stay when it's inconvenient, to soften when it would be easier to dominate, to remain rooted when everything in your body wants to retreat into certainty. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't just touch lives. It transforms them, because she no longer fears you. She no longer doubts herself around you. She no longer shrinks to stay close. She expands, because your presence is not a ceiling, it's a sky. And now she flies, not away from you, but with you. And the sky is endless, because in the end, this was never about being in charge. It was about being in truth, about being the kind of man who could walk beside a storm and not need to silence it, who could see fire in her eyes and not extinguish it out of fear, but warm his hands by it, honor it, fuel it. She doesn't want to be handled. She wants to be held. Not in control, but in consciousness. Not by someone who tells her what to do, but by someone who shows her what it means to lead yourself so completely that no one around you feels owned, only safe. And when that safety becomes your signature, when your presence no longer overpowers, but invites, then she follows. Not because she must, but because she trusts. And that trust, it's not won through titles. It's earned through truth, through tenderness, through time. You call it leadership, but now you live it, not from your mouth, from your being. And because of that, she breathes deeper around you. She dreams louder beside you. She dares to be fully her, not in rebellion, but in response to the rare sacred power of a man who no longer needs to dominate, to be divine. That's not just leadership, that's liberation. And that is the legacy you were born to leave. So let the world keep defining leadership by metrics, by followers, by influence, by control. Let them chase obedience. Let them measure worth in how loud a room falls silent when a man enters. But you know now, true leadership isn't about the silence you command. It's about the freedom you create. It's about whether those around you rise into their own truth or shrink beneath the weight of yours. It's not about being right. It's about being real. Not about having all the answers, but asking the questions that matter, the ones that burn through illusion, that tear away the masks, that call out the gold hidden beneath someone's pain. You are not here to be worshipped. You are here to witness, to bear holy, grounded, unshakable witness to the people around you, especially her, to say with your eyes, your breath, your stillness, I will not shape you. I will not shrink you. I will not lead you away from yourself, just to feel like a man. You've seen the truth. You've lived the difference. You know now, she doesn't need your dominance. She needs your depth. She doesn't need you to lead her. She needs you to lead you so powerfully, so honestly, so consciously, that your presence becomes a lighthouse, not a leash. And when you do, she won't just follow. She'll rise with you, beside you, because of you. And that is what you were born for. Born not to tower over, but to stand beside. Born not to dictate, but to demonstrate. Born not to lead with force, but with faith. Faith that she is whole. Faith that you are enough. Faith that the dance between you is not a battle of wills, but a union of awakened ones. And this is the mark of a truly sovereign man. He no longer fears her strength. He welcomes it. He no longer competes with her truth. He amplifies it. He no longer controls to feel secure. He connects to become free. Because real leadership isn't about who walks behind you. It's about who walks beside you, freely, fully, fiercely. So let this be your legacy. Not the man who conquered her, but the man who created space for her to become. Not the man who made her smaller, but the man whose love was wide enough to hold her entire soul. You call it leadership, let her call it liberation. Let the world remember you, not for the orders you gave, but for the presence you were. The kind of presence that didn't need to dominate, to be divine. The kind of leadership that didn't need to be followed, to be felt. And the kind of man who finally understood the greatest power you will ever hold is the one you never have to use, because it lives in who you are, not what you command. And so you stand here now, not as the man who leads for approval, not as the man who commands out of fear, but as a man who became something deeper, a presence, a mirror, a storm that no longer destroys, but clears the sky. She does not follow you because you are loud. She walks with you because your silence is sovereign, because your gaze does not control, it confirms, because your hands do not cage, they carry, because your heart no longer demands, it devotes. This is the man the world has waited for, not a ruler, not a savior, but a man who mastered himself enough to no longer need the world to submit. She doesn't want your crown. She wants your truth. And now she has it. Not because you spoke it, but because you became it. And in that becoming, you gave the world a rare kind of leadership. Not of dominance, but of depth. And from that depth, a woman rose, a kingdom healed, and a new world began. She's not reckless. She's unapologetically free. She is the embodiment of the untamed spirit, the fierce echo of the wild feminine that refuses to be caged. In a world that seeks to label, to confine, to domesticate, she stands as a testament to the power of authenticity, the courage of self-expression, and the beauty of living unbound. From the depths of her soul, she draws strength not from conformity, but from the raw, unfiltered truth of her being. She dances to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, sings the song of her own making, and walks the paths carved by her own footsteps. She is not a rebel without a cause. She is a revolutionary with a purpose. In her eyes you see the fire of 1,000 suns, the wisdom of ancient stars, and the promise of a new dawn. She does not seek permission to be herself. She grants herself the freedom to be. And in doing so, she invites others to do the same. She is the storm and the calm, the question and the answer, the journey and the destination. She is the mirror that reflects the truth we often hide from, the voice that speaks the words we dare not say, the presence that challenges us to rise, to awaken, to remember who we are. So, when you see her, do not try to contain her, do not attempt to define her, do not seek to understand her through the lens of your limitations. Instead, honor her freedom, respect her journey, and learn from her courage. For she is not reckless, she is unapologetically free. And in her freedom lies the key to our own liberation. She's not reckless, she's unapologetically free. A woman who has shed the weight of expectations, the chains of conformity, and the silence of suppression. She walks into rooms not to seek approval, but to radiate authenticity. Her presence is a declaration, not of defiance, but of self-ownership. In a world that often labels her passion as chaos, her confidence as arrogance, and her independence as rebellion, she remains steadfast, because she knows that true freedom is not the absence of boundaries, but the courage to define them for oneself. She is the embodiment of Carl Jung's philosophy, the integration of the shadow and the light, the conscious and the unconscious, the self and the soul. She has faced her inner depths, confronted her fears, and emerged not unscathed but unshaken. Her journey is not about perfection but about presence, not about being right but about being real. She understands that vulnerability is not weakness, but the birthplace of strength. She doesn't ask for permission to be herself. She simply is. And in doing so, she gives others the courage to be themselves. So when you see her, Don't mistake her freedom for recklessness. Recognize it as the highest form of self-respect. Understand that her path, though unconventional, is paved with intention, integrity, and inner truth. She is not a storm to be weathered, but a force to be revered. She is not a puzzle to be solved, but a masterpiece to be appreciated. She is not reckless. She is unapologetically free. She's not reckless. She's unapologetically free. She is the embodiment of untamed spirit, the fierce echo of the wild feminine that refuses to be caged. In a world that seeks to label, to confine, to domesticate, she stands as a testament to the power of authenticity, the courage of self-expression, and the beauty of living unbound. From the depths of her soul, she draws strength not from conformity, but from the raw, unfiltered truth of her being. She dances to the rhythm of her own heartbeat, sings the song of her own making, and walks the path carved by her own footsteps. She is not a rebel without a cause. She is a revolutionary with a purpose. In her eyes, you see the fire of 1,000 suns, the wisdom of ancient stars, and the promise of a new dawn. She does not seek permission to be herself. She grants herself the freedom to be. And in doing so, she invites others to do the same. Medium. She is the storm and the calm, the question and the answer, the journey and the destination. She is the mirror that reflects the truth we often hide from, the voice that speaks the words we dare not say, the presence that challenges us to rise, to awaken, to remember who we are. So, when you see her, do not try to contain her. Do not attempt to define her. Do not seek to understand her through the lens of your limitations. Instead, honor her freedom, respect her journey, and learn from her courage. For she is not reckless. She is unapologetically free. And in her freedom lies the key to our own liberation. She doesn't break rules to cause chaos. She breaks them because they were never built for her wings. Because the architecture of her soul demands more than small talk and safe love. It requires space. It demands reverence. It breathes only in the open. This kind of woman cannot be dated. She must be met. Not with tactics, not with tricks, but with truth. Because if you come to her with fear, she'll feel it before you speak. If you come to her with control, she'll slip through your grasp like wind through a broken net. But if you come to her with presence, with depth, with a heart that's done pretending, she will stay. Not because you captured her, but because she recognized herself in your freedom. You see, she didn't choose this path because it was easy. She chose it because it was real. She learned that being liked is a cheap currency when your soul is bankrupt. She learned that comfort is a silent killer when it costs you your calling. So now she lives with fire in her lungs. She laughs without shrinking. She cries without apologizing. She walks away without guilt because she knows anything that demands the death of her truth is not love. It's a leash, and she was never born to wear one. She was born with the wild written in her bones, with the storm tucked behind her smile, with a map that leads not to where others think she should go, but to where her own voice echoes back the loudest, in canyons of solitude, in valleys of self-discovery, in the mountaintops of unapologetic joy. So when they say she's too much, what they really mean is she's not afraid to be all of herself. When they say she's difficult, what they really mean is she refuses to shrink to make me feel comfortable. And when they say she's reckless, what they truly mean is she doesn't need me to validate her choices. because freedom always threatens the bound. Authenticity always offends the artificial, and a woman who walks with her soul fully lit will always unsettle the ones still hiding in the dark. But that's not her burden to carry. She's not here to soothe the world's discomfort. She's here to embody what it forgot. That life is not meant to be lived in neutral. It's meant to be felt fully, fiercely, freely. So she no longer explains her fire. She no longer apologizes for her wind. She simply burns. She simply moves. And those who are ready, they rise with her, because she understands something most have forgotten, that liberation isn't loud, it's lived. It's in the quiet refusal to perform. It's in the gentle act of choosing herself over and over again, even when the world offers safer scripts. She doesn't want power over anyone. She wants power with. She wants partnership that doesn't play pretend. She wants presence that doesn't flinch. She wants love that doesn't ask her to abandon herself for comfort, compliance, or compromise. This is why she's feared. Not because she's violent, but because she's true. She holds a mirror to the masks we wear. She disrupts the stories we cling to. And in her wake, you're left with only two choices: awaken or retreat, because she won't slow down. To make her freedom easier to digest, she won't dilute her voice. To match the volume of your expectations. And she won't soften her truth just to soothe the insecurity of a man still learning to face his own. She's not reckless. She's free. And her freedom is an invitation not for the faint of heart, but for those willing to burn everything false, to stand in what is real. She does not crave chaos, but she will burn the false peace built on her silence. She does not seek conflict, but she will not bend just to keep the illusion of harmony. She has tasted the bitterness of betrayal, not from enemies, but from betraying herself. In moments she stayed quiet, small, agreeable, and so now she walks with a different kind of vow, not to be loved at all costs, but to never again leave herself behind, because she has learned that any love requiring her to dim her light is not love. It is control in costume, any affection that only thrives when she's agreeable, soft, and sweet is not devotion. It is domestication. And this is why she moves the way she does, not to provoke, but to protect her own fire, because her freedom is not a threat. It is a standard, one that says, if you want to walk beside me, you don't need to cage me. You need to know yourself. You need to hold your own shadow before you try to hold my light. And if you can't, she won't hate you, but she will leave you, not to punish, but to preserve the sacred, to honor the wild, to remain whole. Because to her, freedom isn't a luxury. It's the very soil in which her soul breathes. It is the sacred space where her intuition speaks, where her laughter comes from the gut, where her boundaries are not barriers, but altars, places where respect meets revelation. She doesn't want a relationship that tames her storms or calms her waves. She wants a connection that surfs with her, that dances through uncertainty, that holds space for her complexity without trying to fix it. She wants to be met, not managed, to be seen, not studied, to be felt, not figured out. And this is what separates her from the world that still clings to roles and scripts. She doesn't live according to someone else's lines. She writes in fire. She speaks in instinct. She moves in alignment with a truth older than approval. So if you meet her, not just physically, but soul to soul, understand this. You are not encountering chaos. You are meeting clarity. You are not threatened by her wild. You are challenged by your own walls. And if you choose to stay, truly stay, you will not be rewarded with control. You will be transformed, stripped of illusion, reborn in presence, shattered in the most holy way, because she is not here to be someone's dream. She is here to be herself, fully, fearlessly, finally. And in that full expression, she becomes more than just a woman. She becomes a force, not to be worshipped, not to be feared, but to be witnessed. Witnessed by those brave enough to look beyond the surface, to see not a wild storm to be tamed, but the sacred return of what the world tried to forget, the woman who answers to no one but her soul. She carries the echoes of every ancestor who had to silence their roar. She carries the weight of every generation that was taught to swallow their truth in exchange for acceptance. But she breaks that lineage not with rage, but with remembrance. She remembers who she was before they told her who to be. She remembers that softness and strength are not opposites, but partners. That fire does not always destroy. Sometimes it illuminates. And now, when she walks, it is not just her footsteps you hear. It is the sound of thousands of women rising. It is the song of suppressed truths awakening. It is the rhythm of freedom finally choosing form. So no, she's not reckless. She's reclaiming. And in her reclaiming, she opens the door for us all to find the wild. We bear it just to be loved. She is not a rebellion. She is a return to the soul before shame, a return to instinct before interference, a return to the voice that was silenced, not because it was wrong, but because it was too powerful. She's not dangerous because of what she does. She is dangerous because of what she reminds you of, that somewhere deep inside you too, there is a longing, a knowing, a buried howl begging to be brought back to life. She stands not as a threat, but as a mirror. And what she reflects is the cost of your own captivity. So many label her reckless because they are terrified of what it means to live like her, to live without apology, to live without a mask, to live without needing to be understood by anyone but the divine truth within. But she doesn't need you to understand her. She only needs you to respect her, to know that her freedom is not a performance, it's her birthright. And if you cannot walk beside that fire, then step aside. Not because she needs you to, but because the path she walks does not have space for those still trying to tame the very wild that set her free. And in this wild, sacred space she inhabits, she doesn't seek validation. She embodies it. She doesn't ask for trust. She moves in such alignment with her truth that trust follows her like a shadow. She does not bargain with her boundaries. She does not dilute her voice just to be easier to hold. She does not bend in hopes of being kept, because the moment you ask her to abandon herself, she will leave, not out of anger, but out of devotion to the very self she had to fight, to reclaim. You call her dangerous, but she's just whole. You call her reckless, but she's simply awake. Because to live like this, to love like this, to breathe in this kind of sovereignty, it's not an accident. It's a choice. Made in fire, forged in silence, born from every moment. She chose to be misunderstood rather than misaligned. So let them whisper. Let them warn others of her wild. Let them mistake her truth for rebellion. Because one day they'll realize it wasn't her they were afraid of. It was their own freedom. She reminded them they gave away. And by then, she will be long gone. Not bitter, not broken, but brilliantly intact. She will be walking paths of her own making, hand in hand with those who do not fear her light, but who have lit their own. She will speak not to be heard, but because her voice is an instrument of truth. And she will love, not as a transaction, but as a sacred offering, an extension of presence, not a plea for permanence. She will laugh in rooms where she once whispered. She will dance in places she once tiptoed through. And her name will become a story, not of defiance, but of remembrance. Remembrance that this life is not about fitting in. It's about breaking open. That true intimacy is born not from being agreeable, but from being authentic. That love is not found in who makes her feel safe, but in who makes her feel seen. She will be legend, not because she conquered, but because she refused to be conquered. Not because she burned others down, but because she refused to burn herself, just to warm people who brought no fire of their own. And when history looks back, when generations trace the echo of her walk, they will say, she wasn't reckless. She was real. She was wild. She was free. And in that freedom, she showed the world what possible truly looks like. And those echoes will linger in the bones of daughters not yet born, in the trembling hearts of sons learning a new way to see, in the cracks of systems that once thrived on her silence. She becomes the spark in the minds of those who dare to question, dare to feel deeper, dare to want more than just survival dressed as love. She becomes the myth that undoes false gods, the flame that melts hollow molds, the whisper that says, you were never too much. You were only ever told to shrink because your truth disrupted their comfort. And as her stories pass down, not just through words, but through the felt sense of a woman who walks with her whole soul, others begin to remember. They remember what it means to stand with unshaken boundaries, to speak with a voice not sharpened by defense, but softened by deep knowing, to love without ownership, to lead without domination, to be rooted without being caged. She becomes not just an example, but a permission slip, a living portal to a world beyond performative strength, a world where freedom and connection do not compete, but coexist. And as the last embers of her story flicker in the silence, you realize she never needed the world to change. She just needed to remember. She was never here to be changed by the world because she wasn't reckless. She was the return to the feminine that leads without fear, loves without leash, and lives fully, wildly, and unapologetically free. And in that return, she became the map for others, not to follow her footsteps, but to find their own. Because freedom, real freedom, isn't about imitation. It's about initiation. It's about choosing to walk through fire without knowing what's on the other side, trusting only that what waits there is more honest than the cage you left behind. She lives as a beacon now, not on a pedestal, but in the trenches, in the mess, in the beauty, in the divine chaos of a life unmasked. And she no longer fears being misunderstood. She no longer fears being alone, because she has met herself in the deepest silence and discovered there a love that asks for nothing but truth. No performance, no perfection, just presence. That is where her power lives now. Not in controlling others, but in containing herself. She doesn't seek to convince. She doesn't chase to be chosen. She chooses herself again and again with a reverence so fierce the world must respond not with resistance, but with awe. And so the story ends not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a quiet revolution. A woman walking fully into herself. No apologies, no masks, no fear, only truth, only freedom, only the wild, sacred knowing that she was never reckless. She was just finally free. And now the fire rests, not extinguishingly integrated, because the woman you once called reckless was never wild to destroy. She was wild to restore. She was never chaos. She was clarity disguised in courage. And if you saw her, truly saw her, you wouldn't just see a woman, you'd see the future. Not in chains, not in shame, but in full, radiant, unfiltered sovereignty. She became the thing they tried to tame. And in doing so, she unlocked a revolution that doesn't need noise to move mountains. Her silence is sacred. Her presence is prophecy. Her freedom, contagious. She doesn't need the world to worship her. She needs the world to wake up. And when they finally do, they'll understand. She wasn't here to be owned. She wasn't here to be explained. She wasn't here to be made palatable. She was here to remind us all what a soul looks like when it remembers who it is. Unapologetic, unleashed, unforgettably free.